This video is basically just a continuation of the last one. So what we've just done is we have grabbed the environment variable from the config file, and we're going to use this to pass it to the business rule system. And in the business rule policy, which we defined using the business rule composer, we need to have an environment so that it will fire the correct rule. And we have three different rules here. Okay? And so we're going to be running on our test system. And so in our config file, we set the value of this key to test. And so that key name will be used to pull the variable into our orchestration. Then we map it using kind of a dummy map here. We initialize all the variables over here in our PO trace message to null. Then we set our environment variable in the trace message using a distinguish field to the value of the variable that was either test prod or QA that came out of our config file. Now we're going to call the business rules. And okay, before we couldn't choose any data here because we didn't have a matching schema. So you notice as soon as I clicked please add a row here, it automatically grabbed a message from my orchestration that matches the message expected to be found by the business rule policy. So if I had more than one trace message here, I would get a pull down list and I could actually choose one. But you can see here there's only one to choose from, so there's no choice that needs to be made. And a business rule can actually have more than one message passed to it, but this is again a very simple version here. So that's going to call the business rule system. And then after that, let's just basically move this line of code here, or this shape, to after the business rules. And here we were using a variable before called vTracePath, and we now want that to come from our business rules. So we're going to say message PO trace dot trace file path, and then we're going to add org.po.demo plus this GUID plus dot text. So our trace file name will be our path, which already has the slash on the end of it, with this file name added to it. Okay, the other thing we had over here was actually whether or not we want to trace or not, and that's a true or false flag. So we also need, after we call the rules, to set our true-false flag, which we called vTraceOn. We need to say that equals message PO trace dot, oops, didn't have a capital T there, dot, and then the trace on from the rules. So now, instead of having our variables, is it in the lowercase there? I guess it's actually capital. I made them, oops. Okay, usually I put lowercase v, but I guess here I accidentally put uppercase v. So here our variable vTraceOn, instead of being initialized in the initialization section of our variables, it's going to be initialized from the business rule system. And in the future we have room for growth here so that we can actually have something called trace methodology. Right now we're not using that feature. The only other thing you might want to do here is trace right after the rules, but I don't really think so. So I'm going to add a nice little group box here, and I'm going to put all these shapes in it. Ooh, that doesn't want to go in the group box, does it? That's interesting. Okay, so now we're going to compile and test. So first of all, since I made quite a few changes, I'm going to do a build just to see if I made any programming errors here. Okay, my build was successful, and now I'm going to do a deploy, and the deploy was successful. So every time we do a deploy, what we need to do real quick is refresh here, And let's make sure that our receive locations didn't get clobbered again, right? I think we've learned our lessons from that so far. So receive location here, we always lose our pipeline. And then our send ports, we need to make sure that these guys didn't lose their pipeline as well, which they did. Okay. Now we need to start and stop our host. And then we should be ready to drop our file and test. Okay, so Mr. Test File. What I'm going to do here, I'm tired of dropping the file twice, so I'm going to call this one small. And in our small file, I'm going to make this under $1,000 because we've been testing in the past purchase orders that needed to be approved because they were over 1,000. So I'm going to take the small file, drop it here. Go to hat first of all. Okay, let's see what this says. Oops. And that's the famous message that says there are no subscribers found. Again, we get used to that message, don't we? So I think I made probably another human error here. So let me think about it. Okay, I notice here it says pass through receive. That's not the right pipeline. So we're at 1125. The pipeline is wrong. So I need to go back to, there was one pipeline I didn't reset, one receive location called rloc map demo XML in, and we need to set that to XML receive pipeline. Okay, that should fix that problem. So we're going to drop the small file again. And let's close this extra hat screen here. Let's rerun the hat report. And we're now looking at 1127. Same error. And now it says XML receive. So the next question would be, are my orchestrations started? No, they're not. So ever since I've added this new orchestration, the sub-orchestration, it's kind of, you can see, compounded my complexities here. So it lost the host, and I have to start the sub-orchestration first. In the real world, I don't usually use called orchestrations. I use another more advanced technique which avoids some of these issues. And I'll be teaching you that advanced technique here very shortly. Oh, we lost all our bindings again. I don't like this at all. Okay, so here we go again. Receive standard PO. That's our map in. Approved PO. Approval means needs approval, and no approval means auto approved. And then we need to check the bindings as well. I did that. Okay. So we start the orchestration, and now we go drop our file again. So you can see it does take some amount of patience to do BizTalk, doesn't it? Kind of a stick-to-itiveness that you need. So now it's 11:29. You can see things are running. And so we completed. That's good. So the question is, did we get a trace, and did our business rules actually work? So here's our trace directory. And let's get rid of everything from earlier this evening. And look right here. Oops. we know if the, let's see, let's double check our time on this file. So it's 23:29, which is 11:29, 11:30, and that is my current time of day here. So yes, this is the current trace file. So apparently we did pick up the trace on and off correctly, and it did trace to the right file. So one way we could test this further is we could actually now set our system to be prod, and then we should not see a trace. Okay, so that would be a very quick test. So we're going to go to our config file here and change this to prod. Okay, and then anytime you change your config file, you have to cycle your BizTalk host. So you're going to go to host instances and restart. Then we're going to go drop our file into the map-in directory. So notice right now in our trace directory we have one trace at 11:29 p.m. Okay, we're going to go to map demo in. We're going to drop our small file. We're going to go to hat. Give it just a second to start all the orchestrations. So that's like about a 2-second pause there. And everything ran, no errors. And now we're going to go to our trace file. Now notice we got a partial trace. Notice the trace file is a lot smaller. So I think what actually is happening here is we actually wrote out one trace message. Oh, I know what it is. What we need to do now is actually put our if statement on every single trace. So we actually have a few traces that did not have the if statement on them. So if you recall, let's look at our orchestration. Okay, some of our traces, like right here, we had if vtrace on, right? And then if we look at our trace again here, if we go to trace 1500, scroll down to 1500, there is no if vtrace on here. So to really make this trace now be fully functional, I'm going to have to copy this if statement into every single trace. So I'll simply come down here and paste it there, and then put the closed curly bracket. And then I'll repeat that process on every single trace in the whole orchestration. And I'll stop the video while I do that. Okay, that took about 3 seconds. I'm sorry, it's about 3 or 4 minutes to actually update all my trace statements. And I'm not going to run it again just to show you that that worked. But I want to show you one other thing that can happen here. So I can also force this orchestration to bomb now by putting the wrong parm in my config file. So if I put here bad, for instance, okay, so what we're going to do is pass an environment of bad to our business rule engine, our business rule policy. In our policy here, we have no rule called bad. Okay, so what's going to happen is it's never going to set these parameters, and our orchestration is going to kind of go crazy. So I'm just thinking offhand before I do this. Okay, so we change the config file to bad, we save it. We're going to go to BizTalk admin console, and we're going to restart our host instance. And then we're just going to go drop our little file called small. Okay, then we're going to go to hat. And I'm kind of hoping for some fireworks here. And it didn't bomb or anything. Okay. The next question is, did we get any trace? Okay, so there's no trace, that's for sure. So let's look at the code for just a second. what I was kind of guessing would happen maybe is let me see if I can describe it to you. When we set the values of the trace, we initialize this trace message before we called the business rules. We basically put an empty string here in all four of these fields. Okay. Then we set the environment equal to the word bad. So then we called the business rule engine, and it didn't find the word bad, so none of these rules fired. Therefore, trace on should be, I don't know, unknown. But I guess it must be defaulting to true or false. And then the trace path should be defaulting to nothing. Okay? So the only way to really know what happened here would be to actually force some kind of trace. Kind of my point I'm making here is, and I will actually execute this, what I've done in the real world is I kind of have my own little technique here. So in my trace schema, I'm actually going to add another attribute called rules fired, and I'm going to call it yes, no instead of true, false. And I'm actually going to make it a string. Okay? And then I'm going to distinguish it like we did our other fields. Okay? And now I'm going to go off the video for a minute and I'm going to redeploy this because I think you're tired of watching that by now. And then I'm going to run this again and show you what happens. Okay, before I deploy it again, here's my little trick that I have to add in the code. So as soon as I call the business rules, I need a little decide shape here. And in that decide shape, we're actually going to test on whether or not the rules fired. So we're going to go to potrace dot yes no rules fired equals no. Okay, so if this variable is no, that means the rules didn't fire. So before I call it, what we need to do here is in our little tiny map, we're actually going to set the variable rules fired to no. So we could use uppercase or string concatenate here and put the value no right there. Okay, so rules fired is going to be no because that's what we're setting it to. Now if we actually call the rule system, what we're going to do here now is we're actually going to copy our entire rule again, paste it over here, and then we're going to add a setting here that says the rules fired equal yes. Now notice here this isn't current, unfortunately, because I've added a new variable here called rules fired. So I have to remove the schema and then go to disk. There it is, browse, and I have to re-add the schema. And now I'm going to put a rule here called rules fired, and I'm going to set it to yes on all three of my scenarios. Okay, so now if any one of these three rules fires, my little variable is going to be set to yes. And so I need to save, publish, and deploy my rule. So now in my orchestration, let's make a little more room here. If rules fired equals no, so just to make it better documented, I'm going to put that here in the description of that rule. And then I want to do something like terminate. So I'm going to add the terminate shape here, and I want to say business rules, and then what's the name of my business rule policy? potrace policy. potrace policy did not fire any rules. Okay. And I don't want my orchestration to go even further. And some of the orchestrations I've written in the past, if I don't do this, what happens is I might have some uninitialized variables here, And then typically I'll come down here and I'll get an error that says like you tried to use a distinguished field and that distinguished field's value wasn't set. And that's when I have a much more complex scenario than this. Okay, so again I'm going to stop the video again here because it's been another 20 minutes, and then we'll continue this part 3 in the next video.